Well, hey, everybody. My name is Brian Klein, and I've got Charles Bauer with me today. We are doing a podcast throughout the church for our initiative called Better Together. And one of the things that we want to do today is be able to just talk about as men. There are times, most of the times, we like to do things better together, maybe at a ball game, maybe working on a project around the house, and maybe in just hanging out. But sometimes we don't really, we kind of steer away from that better together time, just kind of building into each other spiritually. And, uh, and there are maybe some reasons. What I want to talk about today with Charles is what are some reasons that sometimes we avoid this as men? And Charles, you shared some things at our Forge meeting on Wednesday morning that I thought was very insightful and would help all of us as men to be able to recognize those components that sometimes we face when it talks about getting together with other men and talking about what's really going on in our lives. So I appreciate you being here today and your transparency and your insightfulness into this. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Charles, and then let's talk about a little bit about being better together piece of finding community as men.
Okay. I'd say, to think about growing and better together, one thing that I learn more and more and more is that I'm nowhere near being there yet. Still on that journey. Um, there are a lot of things that have prevented me, I suppose, from walking down that path in a more vulnerable situation. I used to be a part of, accountability groups and Bible studies, etc., in years past, and but I always found for me that I was willing to be vulnerable, but being very selective in what I was vulnerable about, because it was a way of maintaining what image I wanted to maintain.
Yeah.
And I think for me, the biggest thing that has kept me from, being more in depth and vulnerable among other men, especially, is twofold. One, thinking I can do it myself. I don't need that.
Yeah.
I can do it on my own.
Yeah.
And but in reality, the real reason that I want to do it on my own is because I don't want to drop the guard. It's a fear of rejection, and I guess the older I get, the more I realize that I'm far more sinful than I care to admit. And there's pride, there's selfishness, there's lust, there's gluttony, there's self-indulgence, laziness, all of those things.
Yeah.
And the fear of not just sharing that I struggle with all those things, but the depth at which I struggle with them, how often I struggle with them.
Yeah.
Part of what prevents me from wanting to reach out to other men in times of temptation is that if I did that, I'd be texting them every 10 minutes. I mean, it's so there's not just the fear of being exposed, but there's also the fear of not knowing how to draw the right lines, right? I mean, if I was reaching out to brothers every 10 minutes, eventually they're going to get tired of hearing from me.
Yeah.
And rightly so, right? I mean, there's a point where we say to somebody that's that needy, you need to stand up on your own somehow or another, right? And so learning where that line is drawn, what's my responsibility, and how do I take the initiative by God's grace to grow in those areas of my life, and when do I reach out to somebody for help?
Right.
I don't have that figured out yet, right?
Yeah.
But I would say the last fear is just the fear of failure, right? I mean, okay, I do all this. I expose myself to these men. I find this correct balance, whatever it might be, and I still don't grow.
Right.
I'm still failing.
Yeah.
And it's hard on a Sunday morning because I sit in the back of sanctuary and I know that as I look around, there are a lot of men, right, in that same scenario.
Yeah. Yeah. This is touching you right now. This is touching you. It touches me as well. And I just think of how many men walk in, and they how many of us have this, what we talked about in the last few weeks, have this mask on that we come in, we become stoic, or we become this macho man, this I've got it all figured out type thing, but really deep inside, we're hurting inside, and we don't have it figured out. And I don't know if you ever had say this to yourself, man, if you really knew who I really am, you know, I'm this on Sunday morning, but if you really kind of knew, you kind of feel this awkwardness in yourself, you know.
Totally. Yeah.
And this morning we had some time around a campfire, and we just had a group of men. We had what was there, 6 of us. There's something about, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's more for me, but there's something about being around a fire. I don't care if it's in the morning or if it's in the evening, that all of a sudden it just kind of eventually breaks down that posing or mask wearing, and you're all of a sudden starting to share things that are authentic and real in your life of what you're doing. And so I appreciate that you've been just sharing from your heart, Charles, that aspect of the fear, the failure. Man, if I reached out all the time, what is that? I don't want to be a pest,
right?
And all of that. But what has drawn you into a group of men? What gets you to that point of where you're all of a sudden saying, I've got to do this.
Yeah.
I've got to do this. I've got to have. You and I are in a couple men's groups right now. Okay. So what would you say from your own personal experience has caused you to say, I've got to be a part of this, and I've got to be invested in this?
Yeah, I think first of all, I had to admit defeat, and I had to admit that I can't do it on my own. It's not possible.
Yeah,
I've tried. I know it's not possible. I've tried, and so admitting that defeat was probably the first step for me, I guess. And just a desire to move past that, a desire to not be defeated, the rest of my life, in my Christian walk. A desire to know the power of Christ's resurrection, right? To see that in my own life. And there have been many years where the locusts have eaten, and there's a desire to see God restore those years that the locusts have eaten in my life. So I think there's just a new desire or hunger there that wasn't there before. And knowing that what I've done hasn't worked, and that God calls us to community. And so the willingness to be vulnerable in that regard. And I think probably just as important, if maybe not more important, is that not only does my walk depend on that, but other souls depend on that.
Right.
I mean, if sin so easily entangles me from being able to use whatever God gifts that God has given me in the lives of other people, then those people are suffering because of my unwillingness to be vulnerable,
Yeah.
my unwillingness to untangle from sin.
Yeah.
And I think that's true for all of us, that there are gifts that God desires to use for the growth of his kingdom.
Right.
And if we're not willing to do what it takes to grow in our walks with Christ, then we will be prevented from using those gifts for his kingdom. And there are souls that are dependent on our using the gifts God's given us. So I think that's probably the biggest motivation for me.
Yeah. I think of in Samuel, David was a man after God's own heart, but there became a point in time in his life where he kind of went crazy. Okay. And all of a sudden he found himself despondent, in despair, discouraged, and he went into the cave by himself. He went into a cave. He withdrew in a cave, the cave of Adullam. But yet, at the same time, eventually, slowly, other men started coming in, finding out where he was, and they started coming into that cave as well. Now, I don't know what exactly was happening in that cave, but David went there to be with himself. I believe David probably spent a lot of time as a shepherd boy in a cave. Okay, spending time with God, singing, connecting with God, and in this very discouraging, despondent, despair moment in his life where he was in debt, he was just broken. He was a broken man. All of a sudden, he wanted to spend time with God. And then there was this moment where these men started finding out where David was, and it says, David was there in this cave with other men that were in despair, despondent, discouraged, and broken as well. And as you read that in Samuel, all of a sudden, as they spend that time in community together, it says that these men became mighty men. They became mighty men. So something was happening in that community in the cave. Something was happening in that moment, in that. And, you were just talking, Charles, just briefly, as you're sitting in the back row of the church and you're just watching men come in, and you're just kind of seeing men that maybe there's just this kind of like this walking lostness that they have, that they're just kind of going through the motions of it and
hiding
and just kind of going through the routine of going to church, but really kind of being disconnected with God, and maybe they're discouraged and they don't know who to talk to be about their discouragement. So what would you say as we wrap this up today? How would you encourage a man to take that step? That because I think the hardest first step to take is to show up. To actually just say, okay, I'm tired of doing this by myself. I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of posing. I'm tired of putting on this religious mask, this spiritual mask, when in reality, I know that I'm not anything of what I've been hearing. And I don't know how to be a man of God. So what would be some things you would say that you've learned about what it takes to make that step to show up and to be in a community, whether it's a community of a small group of men or a community in a life group or whatever that would be? What have you learned? What could you share that would encourage a man to step out of isolation into a community part?
Well, I guess the first question I would ask is, what do you have to lose?
Yeah.
Really, what do you have to lose?
Right.
And being, I think, selective about who you're going to expose yourself to. I really love our life group, but it's obviously a mixed couple, mixed group, right? And so it's a little bit more difficult to be vulnerable as a man in those scenarios. So finding a group of men men that you admire, men you respect, um, and and allowing them to begin to model for you what it means to be vulnerable. Um, and it probably will take some time,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
I've been coming to Forge for a couple of years, 3 years, and been a part of other men's groups, and some we're in, right? But it takes time to um, see the courage of other men before you build the courage yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing,
Yeah.
to see that when somebody else is being vulnerable, the other men are still loving them.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing,
Yeah.
to see that. But if
Yeah.
you never expose yourself to it, and
Yeah.
you never have the courage to say, okay, I'm sick and tired of being where I am.
Hmm.
What I'm doing isn't working. Being in hiding isn't working.
Right.
So I may as well come out and see what God does in the midst of exposure.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you got? What do you got to lose?
yeah, what do you got to lose?
What do you have to lose?
Other than your own image,
Yep.
the image you're portraying, other than the sin that you're carrying around, other than the loneliness,
Yep.
The isolation.
Yeah.
And will it cause waves? Absolutely, it'll cause waves.
Yeah.
It'll cause waves in a marriage. It'll cause waves in parenting. It'll cause waves in your friendships, because anytime you're going to start exposing stuff, it's going to cause waves.
Yeah.
And the nice thing to know is that God's big enough to handle that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the beauty of it, is when you get men, it takes time. And that's one of the things, I think the biggest thing that sometimes men don't want to be a part of is because, man, if I show up, do I have to air all my stuff right away?
All right.
And it's not that at all.
No.
You got to know that it's a safe place. You got to know, you got to build relational components to it. And, you and I've been showing up on Friday mornings at 6 a.m. around a fire. And the first time I went, it was kind of like, man, this is kind of just, there's no depth here,
Right.
But the last 2 or 3 times, I mean, there's been guys opening up, just sharing what God's been doing in their life, or what they're battling with,
And praying for each
and
other.
praying for each other,
Yeah.
and praying for each other, and that we're not alone. One of the things for me is being able to hear someone else just open up a little bit. It's kind of like, wow, I'm going through the same stuff. It's a
Yeah.
little different,
Yeah.
but it's just not me.
Yeah.
And being able to find that support base.
There is no
in that.
temptation that is overtaking you that is not common among men.
That's right. That's right. So we're all walking in it, but we've got to find that there's really strength in being able to get the support from others,
Mhm.
and being able to know that we're not alone in the battle of it. Charles, thanks for the time.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for the time, man. Thanks for being a brother to me,
Mm.
honestly.
Ditto.
And you've sharpened me in a lot of ways. I've just loved our friendship.
Mm.
I've loved how it's grown,
Yeah.
and we have become better together.
Yes. Yeah.
Proverbs 27:17 is iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. And you've been there to pray for me on weekends. You've been there to reach out and to care for me. I've been there for you
Absolutely.
in those moments, and we are better together. And we just love to be able to see men be able to discover that more and more as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, hey, thanks for the time.
Thank you.
Thanks for spending some time sharing your heart with us. And so take care. Men, if you're interested in getting to know how to become part of this, if you're tired of being alone and just walking alone in this, we would love to get you connected with a group of men. And if it can't be on Wednesday morning, it's Monday nights. If it can't be Wednesday or Monday nights, there's other nights that men are getting together. Just reach out to me, Brian at CarnegieFree.com, and I would be happy to get you connected with men that would just love to walk together with you and help you and encourage you to be the man that God's calling you to be. So take care. Thanks for listening, and God bless. And remember, we are better together than we ever are alone. All right. All right. Take care.